Good morning. My name is Nora Krug, and I am an editor and writer at the Washington Post, which is a charter sponsor of the National Book Festival. I'm excited to be here this morning. Does anybody here like trains? Okay. Does anybody here like astronauts or outer space? Okay. So you have come to the right event. I'm very excited to introduce Brian Floca, who is the author and illustrator of some of the most beautiful children's books available, or just the most beautiful books, period. One of them is Locomotive, which won the Caldecott Medal in 2014. And thank you to Lydia for letting me borrow Moonshot, the flight of Apollo 11, and the Racecar Alphabet. His most recent book is the new edition of Moonshot, which has been revised and expanded for the 50th anniversary of the first moon landing. Brian has also illustrated Avi's Poppy series, Ballet for Martha, and Princess Cora and the Crocodile, and Hawk Rising. In addition to Caldecott Medal, Brian's books have received 4 Robert F. Sibert Honor Awards for Distinguished Informational Books and a Silver Medal from the Society of Illustrators. Brian is from Texas, but lives in Brooklyn. And if you would like to have your book signed, he will be signing at 11:30. And now I'm not going to take any more of his time, and here's Brian.
Thanks. Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Nora. Thanks to the National Book Festival and all the people volunteering for it and making it happen. Thanks to my parents, family, and friends who are here. And thanks to all of you for coming. Yes. I'm very happy to be here with the expanded edition of Moonshot that came out this year. I'm going to talk to you about making this book. In a certain sense, I'm going to talk to you about making this book 3 times. I would like to talk to you about why I wanted to make this book, how I made it, and why it's so hard for me to answer the question, how long does it take for you to make a book? So I want to start at the very beginning. This is an astronaut. I drew this astronaut when I was 4. I'm not old enough to remember Apollo 11, but I am old enough to have been propped up in front of it, I'm told. So I grew up in the 70s, sort of after Apollo had finished, but in kind of the wake of the space race. This is me in the 70s in Temple, Texas. I had this poster in my room. This is the poster J.J. Abrams puts in his movies now in the background when he wants to say 1979. This is a space shuttle I made for extra credit when I had to write a report on the space shuttle out of paper mache and chicken wire and egg cartons. So I grew up sort of interested in space, loving this material. It was really when, as an adult, I read this book, A Man on the Moon by Andrew Chaikin, and saw this movie, For All Mankind by Al Reinert, that this kind of background interest in space got catalyzed into something a little more specific and a little more active. These are 2, it's a great book and it's a beautiful movie for sort of helping you appreciate the how and why of Apollo and many of the things that I consider interesting and kind of beautiful about it. And the interesting things about it, I think for me, were first the people who made it happen, the engineers, the mathematicians, the planners, and of course the astronauts themselves. Really smart, capable people. A lot of them had engineering training themselves. People whose day-to-day work was to fly really weird experimental airplanes. You can't even call one of those an airplane, machines. I was starting to wonder if I was the source of the machines themselves I found fascinating. And then the view that these missions gave us I found fascinating and beautiful and even slightly unnerving. This close view of the moon and then this view of our home, the Earth, from the moon. And like I said, I found this beautiful and unnerving. And there's actually a term for this in art history, which is the notion of the sublime. Something that's so majestic that it sort of tips from being beautiful into almost being frightening. And you hear this term applied to landscapes, you hear it applied to scenes of the ocean, and sometimes you hear it applied to space. And there's a great moment in a novel from 1882 by Thomas Hardy that I think touches on this feeling. Hardy has two of his characters up in a tower looking into space through a telescope. And they start to sort of imagine themselves wandering through space. And Hardy writes, "They saw at once its beauty and its frightfulness. They were oppressed with the presence of a vastness they could not cope with even as an idea, and which hung about them like a nightmare." Its beauty and its frightfulness. So that's something that I saw, especially in the photographs of Apollo and the photographs of our home, the Earth, sort of hanging in all this emptiness in space. And so for the people, the machinery, the terror, I thought this is kind of something I would like to make a book about. And a point to make about this feeling of mine is that you've probably all heard this great writing advice, write what you know. That's generally not what I do when I set out to make a book. I usually try to make a book about something I want to know more about. So when I make a book, and I think when most people make books, they're not just like writing down stuff that, a bunch of stuff that they already know cold. They're deciding to spend time with something they want to know more about. And that's where the book comes from. So I first tried to write this story about 20 years ago, actually. And I didn't actually want to write it about Apollo 11. I wanted to write it about Apollo 8. Now, this is not the first mission to land on the moon, but it's the first mission to go from the Earth to the moon. So this is before Apollo 11. And I thought that was in itself pretty amazing, because it is so far from the Earth to the moon. And so, I think I actually want to do a little demonstration of scale to show you just how far it is from the Earth to the moon. And we can do this with some common household objects, but I'll need 3 volunteers, please. Yes, please? Yes? Yes? All right, come on up. Just climb up. Okay, do you know what this is? It's the Earth. Can you hold the Earth? And if that's the Earth, this is about the size of, what do you think? The moon. So this is the Earth and the moon. Now, how far apart, you're going to be, come here. You're going to be the distance between the Earth and the moon. Okay. But how far apart do you think the tennis ball should be from the basketball? How far? 100 meters. Okay, it's not going to be that far. Why don't you hold on to this, and you just unspool that and walk that way. And Earth, go with the distance there. Walking backwards towards the edge of the stage. Keep going. Okay, maybe you have to come this way too a little bit, Moon. So before Apollo 8, nobody had gotten very far off of this basketball. Keep going. Yeah. Okay, now we're in trouble. What? Okay, maybe you have to stay there. Okay, you go this way. Now, can you unspool for the moon? We didn't rehearse this. You might be surprised. Is that it? All right. Okay. Okay. So it's 24 feet. So from the Earth to the tennis ball is 24 feet. So the crew of Apollo 8 were the first to go in their tiny space. I don't have a scale model spaceship, but it would take us about 3 days to walk over here. Pretty impressive? Oh, come on. I'm impressed. Okay, thank you guys. Thanks. Well, I'll tell you later. All right, so I decided to make a book about Apollo 8. And I love this material so much that I decided to put kind of everything I could about Apollo 8 in this book, which was a problem because you don't actually want to read everything about Apollo 8. You want to read selections about Apollo 8 that create a sense of a story and a sense of a narrative. So I knew I had written a book about Apollo 8, which included a little bit about Sputnik and the space race, that was not really working. And I put this book in my drawer, and it was called Merry Christmas from the Moon because the Apollo 8 crew orbited the moon on Christmas Eve in 1968. I put it in a drawer, and I didn't quite forget about it, but I stopped thinking about it, really for about 5 years. And then I actually had a dream. I had a dream that if I was going to make a book about Apollo for the 40th anniversary of the landing, I had kind of missed the deadline. It was too late to make that book. And I woke up and I did the math and I realized there was still time actually to make this book. And this dream sort of lit a fire under me and got me going back to the Apollo material to see if I could make a book for the 40th anniversary. And this time I approached the story with a lot more discipline. I thought I had written some other books that were much shorter. I had found a way of writing, I think that trying to say a little bit more with a little bit less. So I went back to the material, and instead of these big paragraph blocks of text now, you still have some. I'm trying to find the most sort of succinct, poetic way I can to tell this story. I sold this idea to my editor, Dick Jackson. Got a book contract. And now I'm ready to go. But again, remember, I'm trying to write not a bunch of stuff that I already know. I'm trying to write stuff that I want to know. So this means I have to go in and really do the research now to make this book, which means a lot of reading myself. A lot of books go into making any book often. And I'm already starting to write the book, but the writing sort of helps me figure out what I need to learn in order to make the book. And then the research sort of sends me back to the writing. And it really goes back and forth for me as I'm working, back to the source material, back to the writing. Sometimes it goes very smoothly. Sometimes it doesn't go so smoothly. Sometimes you learn things that challenge your idea of the book you wanted to make. And that's when the work is kind of the most difficult, but also sometimes the most interesting. I looked at a lot of photographs. I looked at diagrams, charts. I visited Mission Control in Houston, and this is before the fantastic renovation they've just completed. They have a spare Saturn V rocket there. And of course, I visited the Air and Space Museum here in DC. This is back when the Lunar module was over by the McDonald's. And I'm looking for things both to help me understand the story that I want to tell, and also for little details that I can put in the story to make it feel real and interesting for you. I bought a Buzz Aldrin action figure, which I used to help me with the shadows on my drawing of Neil Armstrong. If you use a Buzz Aldrin action figure to draw Neil Armstrong, it actually invalidates the warranty. So all of this work, and then I go back to the drawing table and I try to put all of this I try to sort of find the form that this material wants to be in. I'm drawing, I'm sketching. It's a very iterative process. I don't just sit down and get the drawing right on the first try. I have to sort of practice and develop both the text that I'm writing and the drawings that I want to make for you. So that was 10 years ago. The book came out. I felt very happy with how it was received, and that could have been the end. But a couple of years ago, I was aware that the 50th anniversary was coming up, and I started to sort of follow the Apollo news again, and I started to get a little bit itchy almost. And I did this little sketch of what I would do with 8 extra pages in Moonshot. And probably late at night when I should have been doing something else, I went through the book and I put in a lot of Post-it notes where I saw things that I might have done just a little bit differently. Here's something from the original edition. This is from when I was working on the original edition of the book. I had a line here. Here below were all those who drew the plans, who sewed the suits, who built the machines. And then I have a note to myself, cut or its own page. Because you might remember I had written that one version of this story that was just too long earlier. So I was kind of looking to really trim this story down as much as I could. So I left that material out. And then I felt a little bit regretful that I had left that out. And now I thought, well, now if I'm making the book a little bit longer, maybe I have a chance to put that material back in and give it its own page. And another reason for doing that was that I had learned things since making the first edition of Moonshot. For instance, this book had come out, Hidden Figures. So I learned a little bit more about the people who had worked on Apollo. So here's a sketch for how I can incorporate all the 400,000 people, or some at least acknowledgement of the 400,000 people who worked on the Apollo missions. I wanted to include this kind of funny moment where Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong try to sleep in the lunar module after they've landed and after they've done their moonwalk. And this little drawing in the book was a reminder for me of just how complicated it can be to work with this material. We have a written account of how Aldrin and Armstrong slept in the lunar module. We know that Aldrin slept on the floor and that Armstrong got up on the engine and rigged up a sort of tether for a hammock for his feet with a tether, which is great if you just want to write about how they slept. But if you want to draw it, then you have to try to figure out, okay, well, where exactly did this tether attach? And we know it was to a handhold in the lunar module. So what I have to do then is sort of go through every picture I can find of the interior of the lunar module and look for the handhold that Armstrong might have used and try to come up with my best guess as to which handhold and how this arrangement was done. And I got so sort of caught up in this problem that I reached out for help to the guys who run this incredible website called the Apollo 11 Lunar Surface Journal, which is this incredible collection of documents and photographs and transcripts. And these guys all are so interested and invested in Apollo 11 that once you start talking to them, they come back and talk to you. And I ended up in a long conversation with these guys who had also thought about this question, sort of comparing drawings, charts, diagrams. And I think together we came up with a solution that at least feels right to me. So it's a lot of work to make a book like this, but you know, when you're interested in the material, when you love the material, it's the best kind of work. I also realized going back into the book how sensitive a book is, how when you're making a book, you're making a series of pictures that are all existing in relationship to the other pictures around them. And if you want to insert new pictures, you sort of change the relationship of the pictures to each other. And this can be a very tricky, fraught thing to do. I'll give you an example of how that works from the original Moonshot. This was a drawing, a moment I always wanted to have in the book, a moment of an astronaut on the moon looking up and seeing the Earth in the sky. Again, trying to capture some of that kind of beauty and almost frightfulness of the view of the Earth in space. And originally, I had this all happen on one page. I had the astronaut look up, you see the Earth, and the book sort of gives you the whole moment all at once. And I thought that wasn't quite interesting enough. And I remembered some good advice that I had heard. Narrative tension is primarily about withholding information. So if I could withhold some of that information in that moment, I could sort of help strengthen the moment. If I can show you the astronaut looking up and not show you what the astronaut is seeing, instead of telling you something, this picture is kind of asking you a question. And if you want to know the answer to the question, what do you have to do? Turn the page. So I want to make a book that makes you want to turn the page. So page order gets to be something that authors and illustrators spend a lot of time thinking about how to make work. So it can be very tricky to insert new pages into a book you've already done. But I went back, these are all scenes from the expanded edition of Moonshot, and then I started making kind of smaller changes. There's a moment in the book where the text tells you that everyone on Earth cheers when Armstrong lands, and I had kind of wished there was a little bit more of a cheer in that moment, so I was able to add that in the new edition. Then I started adjusting the color of the thermal shields on the lunar module because I thought those could be a little more accurate. Not that people had really been writing me letters about the thermal shields. I went back and I gave Armstrong a little bit of stubble because the astronauts did have stubble. They'd been out there for 3 days. And at first I gave him a little bit of too much stubble. I mean, Nixon was president, but not everyone needed to look like Nixon. I decided to redo this painting because I thought I could capture the scale of the interior of the command module a little bit better. And in the end, I'm really impressed with how I basically exactly recreated the scale, the sense of scale I had in the original. And that's kind of when you know it's time to stop. And so that is the new edition of Moonshot, and we've probably got about 5 minutes for questions. Someone is out here telling me exactly how much time I have, but I think it's 5. It's 5. Are there any questions? Oh no, it's two-time Caldecott medalist Sophie Blackall, speaking today at 12:30 on this stage, probably coming up to ask me something about the AV.
No, it's a very important question.
No.
The space shuttle paper mache model
Yeah.
that you showed early
Yeah,
on.
that was for extra credit, and that's,
Yeah.
now you all know how I
Yeah.
got into college.
It seemed very well photographed, which makes me think that you still have this space shuttle, or that your parents perhaps have this space shuttle. I would just like to know where the
There are
paper
many
mache
things
model
still
is.
in possession in my mother's home. Mom, do you want to come up and speak to this? No. The space shuttle may have been photographed prior to its final liftoff, but actually I can't remember. It might still be in the closet. I'll let you know next week. Any follow-up questions to that? Important? Yes.
Why was this to blind Floca? That I wondered if he could get my book signed.
Question about book signing. Book signings will be from 11:30 to 12:30. Somewhere. Thank you. Oh, good. No, she's leaving.
Do you want to go to space?
Do I want to go to space? If I was given a serious offer to go to space, I would have to think about that seriously. I find the idea of being on top of a giant flying bomb kind of unnerving. So I'm not in a big rush to do it. But if given the opportunity, I might have to take it.
I like to do with my mom and daddy.
Thank you. Oh, hello.
Hello. So when you were speaking about kind of your philosophy of how you want to learn what you write,
Yeah.
how do you find those kind of things, and when do you know that you want to write about it?
Oh, that's a great question. Thanks. I don't want to give the impression that I'm always on this sort of virtuous path, but I think when you're reading interesting things, when you're watching interesting movies, when you're sort of paying attention to the world, you come across things that interest you, and you just a funny thing about when you decide to be an author or an artist is you decide you're going to keep yourself available for those experiences and alert to them, and you're going to pay attention sort of when you see something that triggers that reaction in yourself, and then you're going to start taking notes and maybe following up on the reading, and I do a lot of that. I think some of my studio mates are here. I think we probably all do that, and certainly an important thing to say is that not every thing that catches my interest then I successfully turn into a book. There are probably like 9 out of 10 things you start writing don't become books, but as someone once said, that's why you do 10 things. So you just sort of, you keep your eyes open, and you go out into the world sort of looking for things that excite you and that interest you. I think Jack London actually said, you can't wait for inspiration, you have to hunt it with a club. So it's a habit to develop. It's a good habit to develop and to maintain. Thank you. Yes.
My question was, it seemed all-consuming when you were working on that particular book.
Yes.
How many books or ideas do you work on at a time?
There's usually one on the front burner and then a couple either waiting for attention or maybe one large project and then a smaller project that I'm able to pivot over to while I'm waiting for editorial notes or something like that on the larger project. But I've gotten a little less good at balancing over the years. Like I sort of am happiest when I'm able to go fully invested in one project at a time.
And how many hours a day would you say it?
Really depends how close I am to the deadline.
Okay.
Either on either side of it. No.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Who is your favorite astronaut?
My favorite astronaut is Michael Collins. No, Michael Collins also wrote a book, another great book called Carrying the Fire. And if you want a first-hand account of Apollo 11, that's a good one. Alan Bean is also a good one. Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, they're all great.
What book are you working on next?
What book am I working on next? Nora mentioned Avi's Poppy series during my introduction, and Avi has actually written a new story in the Poppy series. So I'm about to be drawing a lot of mice and long hours. Thank you. Yes?
What material do you use to draw illustrate after you sketch it out?
Yeah, that's all pen and ink and watercolor. So I do the drawing with a nib pen, actually, which is a pen that doesn't have any ink in it. That silver tip is called the nib. I have to dip this pen into my ink if I want to make a drawing. And I like this kind of pen because the quality of the line from it changes as I draw. So when I'm pressing down with a little extra pressure, the line gets a little bolder. And when I'm drawing very lightly, the line gets lighter. Now, what's risky about keeping an open bottle of waterproof ink on your desk? Yeah, that happens sometimes. So I ink the drawings, and then I go over the drawings with watercolor. So this is my watercolor set. And how many of you have used watercolor before? All right, so you know how it works. You get the brush wet, you use the water to mix the color that you want, and then you use the brush to put the color on the page. This is from Locomotive. And so what I do in my studio is I make a big pile of these paintings. And, all right, great. And these are all the wonderful people who turn my pile of stuff into actual books. And I think we are out of time. Thank you. Thanks.